In Screwtape's 25th letter, he speaks about change. He speaks about, well, change in our lives because it's something that's necessary for us. We're always changing. But there's a particular, well, temptation in that he tries to coach Wormwood in, that we should always, well, guard ourselves against. You know, one aspect of this is he talks about Christianity and how there's so much about Christianity, there's so much about the church, there's so much about our faith, there's so much about religion that really doesn't change. He talks about that same old thing. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's Mass. It's that same old thing. We do the same things over and over and over again. It's like the rosary, those mysteries, those prayers. It's the same old thing. Whether it's with the bishops or the potluck dinners, whether it's with the annual celebrations of Easter or Christmas, there's so much about our lives that we tend to return to the same old thing again and again. And so one of the temptations that Screwtape tells Wormwood to maybe do to get the patient to no longer appreciate that same old thing, no longer see its true substance, its true need, his need for its essential truth, is to make it about Christianity and something else. To always attach something to Christianity so that we, rather than going after that same old thing, which is, well, life and God, we tend to search for something else. So it's not so much that we go to Mass for Christianity, but it's that we go there for Christianity and the donuts. And then it becomes about the donuts. And then what we're really seeking is not so much to go and to receive Christ, to receive His Word, but we're just about the donuts. Or maybe it's not donuts. Maybe it's Christianity and music. And so we only go to Mass to, well, seek after good music and that particular song that really speaks to us. So then again, rather than us going to Mass and looking up at the tabernacle and realizing, wow, it's here that I encounter my God. It's here that He comes to nourish me in His body and blood. We are looking at who's playing the piano or who's playing the organ and whether or not we're going to agree with their song choices, right? That the temptation is for us to not want to, well, deal with the same old thing. But indeed, it's the same old thing that has the greatest substance. That same old thing is God's presence in our hearts and in our lives. That's something that should never, in a real sense, grow old in our hearts. We should never look at it as something that does, well, age. We should always be able to appreciate how it continually changes and transforms us, makes us new, and calls us to go deeper, We might go and receive the same old thing at Mass. We hear the same old word. We might say amen and receive the same old body and blood of Christ, but just because it's the same old thing does not make that bad. In fact, it's quite good to have a good home-cooked meal, something that is, well, what we call comfort food. But in a spiritual sense, it's the greatest of all comfort foods. It's the very love, the very life of God given to us. So that's one aspect of this letter on change. The other aspect is that he discusses how indeed God has placed in our heart not only a love for change, but also a love for permanence. That He has given us this rhythm to life, so that we will both be kind of stuck, on a foundation, that we might be, in a sense, immovable, but that we also will advance, that we will go through some changes, that the seasons will happen. And it's not just about the exterior seasons, it's also about our heart. There are certain things about our hearts that are different today than they were 10 years ago, right? And yet there are certain struggles or there are certain aspects of who we are that seem to always be the same. And that's okay to have both of these things in play. And rather than always fighting the things that always seem to be there and just only demanding that we change, and that today should always be different than yesterday, um, and rather than also demanding that there be no change and that we always stay the same and that nothing ever becomes new, we should allow ourselves to actually live in that rhythm, to discover the things that the Lord is changing about us, to discover the call that the Lord is asking us to take up, but then also to discover the things that will always remain, the things that will always be there for us, whether it's God's mercy, whether it's His love, whether it's a particular quality about ourselves, that our friends appreciate and enjoy, but maybe we're a little embarrassed by. Some of those things we should just allow ourselves to fit into that rhythm of life that God gives us. The particular challenge that we might face, or the particular temptation, the one that Screwtape discusses with Wormwood, is a temptation to only look for novelty, to only desire change, to not really want that same old thing, to really not want that permanent aspect of our lives, because it makes it for us feel like we're being drugged back or held back. And yet this love of novelty, or this desire to always want something new, has only gotten worse ever since C.S. Lewis's time, since World War II. And the reason really is because of, technology. It's because of always wanting the new thing, the updated app, the new iPhone, the new car. I mean, now, more than then, our society is just a throwaway society. Out with the old, in with the new, always about the new. But already C.S. Lewis saw it in art, in fashion, back in that day, when artists weren't actually about rooting themselves into what is true and beautiful and lasting and permanent, something that would be called beautiful not only by their grandpa, but also by their grandchild. Artists became about only something that would be called beautiful by their own generation. Something that the grandparents would be like, what is that? And something that the grandchildren would say, that old thing? Our society kind of gave itself over to just being fashionable, rather than allowing both change and permanence to play out in who we are and what we do. I find a very particular image that C.S. Lewis gives us as quite good, quite rich. It's that image of the devils or the demons always desiring us to be equipped with the wrong virtue for any sort of vice. So he says that they want us to be like those running around with fire extinguishers, not in a time of a fire, but in the time of a flood. That we wouldn't be able to, have the virtues that we need in order to actually combat the thing that is making us in great peril. So you might think of today we live in just a hyper-sexualized world. Whether it's the fascination of transgender or homosexual rights, or whether it's just turning on the TV and seeing sexuality presented, frankly, in that case, what is really needed, the virtue that we really need, is chastity. But it's chastity that the devil has made look, so trivial to our time. It's the thing that we need, but it's also the thing that they have made us not want, right? And instead, what we think that we need is more freedom. We need more rights, and rights and freedom are good things, don't get me wrong. But in a world where it seems like there are no rules, where it seems like we can just do what we want, when we want, how we want, where we want, and you turn on the TV at 7 o'clock and you just don't know what you're going to see, right? In a world or in a society that needs some sort of foundation, some sort of grounding, we're only fascinated by the virtue of freedom or the virtue of rights, right? Yet that's the wrong virtue to apply to the situation. It's a virtue, It's like a fire extinguisher, but we're dealing with a flood, not a fire. And so, because we're dealing with a flood, what we really need is to get to high ground. We need to ask the Lord for the gift of chastity. But this is all a good and an interesting thing to contemplate in our own lives. How do we sometimes run away from the permanent, from the same old thing? How often do we just give ourselves over to change? And what virtues are maybe we running away from when we should actually be running towards it? Um, the devils, they're clever, and we have to sometimes, well, be able to see their cunning and to try to be even more cunning so that we can avoid their temptations. But we'll learn more about those things maybe in the next letter.